Hello and welcome to the M&A Science Podcast. This podcast is part of a mission to rethink how M&A is done. The old school settle-led approach, it's dead. Buyer-led M&A is all about strategy, alignment, and efficiency, putting value creation at the center of every deal. And let's be real, it's not just about closing the deal, it's about making it successful. We uncover what truly works in M&A by learning directly from the best. I'm your host, Kisan Patel, founder and CEO at DealRoom and chief scientist at M&A Science. Today, I'm sitting down with Todd Manley, VP of Corporate Development Integration at Intel. Todd's been in the M&A game for a long time, but what really stands out about him is how much he's learned and shared along the way. He didn't take the traditional path into corp dev, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to talk about how people from all kinds of backgrounds, finance, legal, ops, you name it, can break into M&A and actually thrive. If you're not familiar with Intel, they're an American multinational corporation and technology company headquartered in Santa Clara, California. They design, manufacture, and sell computer components such as CPUs and related products for business and consumer markets, traded on NASDAQ under INTC. Today, we're going to talk about how people from all kinds of backgrounds, finance, legal, ops, you name it, can break into M&A and actually thrive. We'll also get into some tips for interviewing, both as a candidate and hiring manager, and how to build a strong network in the M&A world. Todd, how you doing?
I'm good, man. We're finally doing this. It's taking a long
that
time.
was the first thing I was going to make a point of. And probably the first lesson of this podcast is persistence trumps everything.
That's how you get good deals done. You persist. No, I think we first started talking, it feels like 5-6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Yeah. And then over the years, like you've interviewed people in my network, people I know. I think there was one point where Jim Buckley was talking, and maybe it was more of a live webcast or something, and I'm getting on, and I'm like chatting in, hey, Jim, mention this or mention that, and then next thing you know, like we got this three-way tangential conversation happening on the side, which might have lost a few people, but it was fun in the moment. But I've come up for a little air. We had a lot of work here at Intel doing a divestiture and a spin out of our Altera business. It's one of those stories where 10 years ago, Altera came into the Intel family, and we strategically looked at what the portfolio was and made the choice that divesting that and bringing in an outside investor to help it grow was going to be the right decision to make. So, yeah, I didn't mean to be a bad friend for the last 2 years, but I was pretty heads down.
I understand. I forgive you. And, after maybe 15, 20 requests to come on the podcast, we finally got you here live in the Bay Area at Intel. This is global headquarters.
This is the global headquarters.
World headquarters for Intel.
It is. Exactly. Yeah.
Can we start with your background? How did you find your way into M&A? And I think that's a big theme. We want to talk just the diversity of the...
I think it's a great thing to poke on. I appreciate our conversation ahead of time. You'd mentioned, I think it was Matt Arsenault. Yeah, and his viewpoints into getting into M&A. And I went out and watched that, and I was like, man, that resonates really deeply with me. And so my journey in M&A was interesting. I came down to the Bay Area, grew up in the Northwest, came down this way, and played basketball at Stanford. You can't tell how tall I am from sitting down, which is perfectly fine, but Kisan can, share that I banged my knees into the bottom of the table, which didn't feel very good. But came down here and was just thoroughly entranced by tech. And in my studies, I did not have the computer science chops to be someone who's just going to dive straight into tech. But there was an aspect that really intrigued me. I actually was a sociology major with a focus on organizational studies and behavior. And the interesting play on that was a lot of those professors actually taught at the business school. And so I was like, the way to get some some aspect of a business, kind of a business flavored education, even though Stanford was continues to be a liberal arts school. Outside of like the technical stuff that they teach, but coming out of Stanford and playing basketball, didn't try to go play professionally anywhere else. I had reached my ceiling, and I was happy about that. But wanted to go back up to the Northwest. I was from Portland. Thought Nike would be a good fit. Happened that it didn't work out there. I came back down this way, crashed on some couches, and ended up taking my first opportunity with a IT consulting company. If anyone remembers the old name EDS, Electronic Data Systems, funny enough, a precursor, maybe some foreshadowing on M&A. They were acquired and became HP. I think HPE's, or what now is HPE. I think it became their service arm, their consulting arm.
Oh, interesting.
But came into their program, and I kind of joked with the hiring manager. I said, what about my background makes you think I'm going to be a good fit for your organization? And they said, well, we've got the software engineer development program, and we look to bring people in with diverse backgrounds. And you've shown some proficiency in being tech curious. You've done some web programming. This is back in like 1995, and just some HTML, some JavaScript, what have you. And they're like, we can teach you everything you need to know. What would you like to focus on? And so I knew I always wanted to go back to business school, and so, the young 22-year-old just said, I'd like to focus on business applications and understand technology that actually helps businesses do their business. Promptly got put into doing ERP work, all things under the sun, Oracle. So I got trained up on being a programmer, a DBA, a sysadmin, an implementer, you name it. I started out in kind of the order management vertical, and then spread my wings a little bit upstream into CRM, downstream into financials, a little bit to the left into HR and HR analytics, business reporting, and all that. So that was my first 10 years of my career. I was really deep into IT and business applications, and at one point thought, hey, maybe I'll be a CIO. But what was interesting during that whole time, I still had this closet passion around, startups, VC community, private equity, M&A, acquisitions, divestitures, that whole thing. But I was like, I don't have an immediate skill set that plugs into, what would be kind of the standard that everyone thought, kind of gets you into high flying startups, or, I'm the product guy that's got this great idea and I'm going to build it from, 0 to $1 billion. I knew I wasn't that guy. I always joked to my wife that I'm kind of like the Series C, Series D, come in when they need to kind of prop up the business and put a little more structure and formality. And so, funny enough, I did find myself joining WebEx way back in the day. I think we were the last. I joined them about 4 months before they went public, and it was right as the .com crash was happening. So I think we were one of the last companies that kind of got out the door. But it was a fun ride helping to build that business. You could play Monday morning quarterback and go, we kind of were doing things that were in the cloud before the cloud was the cloud. The product had moved from being a hosted kind of client server model that delivered web conferencing capabilities to a solution that was actually hosted in dedicated data centers, where customers would go into their WebEx product just via the browser. And so it was, I'd say pretty cutting edge back then, and a precursor to a lot of things. And it's been really interesting. You hear about, these different, transformational startups that have spun off different founders or inventions or leaders or what have you. And people talk about like the PayPal mafia and the PayPal leaders that have moved on from their early beginnings there. I truly think that one of the underappreciated stories is, some of the leaders that came out of WebEx. You had the subscription company Zora come out of that. They had gone public. I think they're now under private equity ownership. You had some strong engineering leadership with the folks that started Zoom, and kind of more of the common tools that we see now. And it's just been there was a strong proliferation of talent and people that did some amazing things back then and have continued to do that going forward. And during that time, I found an opportunity for my wife to join a different startup. So I kind of used the extended reach of the family to be on the front lines of what was my closet passion, and I wasn't on the front lines of doing M&A, and enjoyed the time there. Moved on to a different startup, and then eventually landed at Cisco. And it was when I was at Cisco, I'd been there for about a year. They actually went out and acquired WebEx. And I remember the day that the deal happened, we were doing skip level leadership conversations. And so I was like a senior program manager, and a bunch of my peers came in, and there was a VP who was facilitating this leadership conversation. So we sit in a big room kind of like this, and he goes, "Hey, big news, we're acquiring WebEx." And at that point, Cisco had been averaging, 8 to 10 deals a year. Typically a little more, kind of tech talent, tuck-in kind of stuff, nothing super big. And so this was actually, I think, the second largest transaction they had done. So like in 2005, they did Scientific Atlanta, which was some set-top boxes for like cable technology, television, what have you. And then WebEx was like 2006. So the second big one. And so when these big ones, everyone in the room's a little fired up, excited, and people had used WebEx. So this was one where it was like, well, we know what it is, we've used it. Like, okay, now it's going to be ours. So the VP goes kind of around the table, getting everyone's opinion, and I'm the last person to give the opinion. And so it comes to me, and I was still relatively new in the organization, and no one really knew my background, and so I kind of got on the proverbial soapbox, and I said, well, I think it's a good acquisition. I think it should have been done, probably 9 to 12 months ago. It was unfortunate that Cisco bought I think it was like the number 3 or the number 4 player in the market, 12 months earlier. That was the wrong acquisition to go do. They should have gone after the market leader, which they finally did, but they probably had to pay a premium. And everyone's looking at me like, how does this guy know so much about the inner workings of WebEx? Now, no one knew that I'd worked there. So as I'm talking, I'm kind of figuring out, okay, what's my punchline? So I say my piece, and I go, oh, and by the way, I worked there for 4 years. So and then you see this kind of relief in the room, like, oh, okay. But what got me into M&A was the conversation that happened after that leadership skip level meeting. I walk out of the room, VP pulls me aside and says, hey, sounds like you know a lot about WebEx. I go, yeah, I still have a lot of friends that are over there, and still stay in touch, small valley. He goes, look, we got our integration team going over there next week, and if you're open to it, I can get you in touch with the IT director who runs the team. I think you might really be valuable in seeing if there's some percent of your time that you can carve off and just go work with them. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And in the moment, I was excited about just the opportunity to kind of, like be part of it. And I remember kind of walking down the hallway going, oh man, like this could be like the kind of the opportunity of my career to kind of pivot out of doing just strictly IT work, and, taking that background and saying, how do I apply it into some aspect that is M&A related? And so, I landed into doing IT integration work, and that's where I first cut my teeth over 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, and it was interesting being part of a organization that was doing so many deals, had a vast number of experts across all parts of their business, and it was a well-oiled machine. I think we can look back and play Monday morning quarterback on, whether deals were successful, whether they hit the value that, people were trying to do. And I'd say, there was always learnings from every deal. I'd say, some of the bigger deals, were a little more difficult because the organizations and the way that we worked were really tuned to kind of the small things and churning through them real quick. But it was an environment where I had a ton of growth. I saw a lot of different ways of how things were working. And it was there when I saw that there was probably an opportunity somewhere in my future to continue to grow, to try to bridge the divide or the gap that was kind of evident when I first started. That was around the deal doing the deal, and then the integration guys doing the integration work. And I'd say we've, as a practice, and you've had other presenters talk about this, and the reason I'm excited to talk to you today, because we're going to talk on some topics that are different than when we first reached out and we were talking about, how do we get an integration management office up and running? What are some of the things that need to be there? I think there's a lot of best practices that, as practitioners, we've been open with each other. We've shared. It's like there's no secret sauce. I get a lot of joy out of seeing other people do this work well. Whether it's a friend at a competing chip company or someone at a software company, if they're going to do a deal, one, I commiserate because I know it's a lot of work, and two, I really hope that they do it well. And I think it's great when practitioners get together and we commiserate, we share what works, what didn't work. But my thought, and this was a thought that started to come together way back in like 2007, 2008, was there were some instances where deals would get done and it would, the proverbial, well, the deal's done, let's throw it over the fence to the integration guys. And, we'd be on the other side of the fence, just kind of like, okay, are we going to catch it? Where's it going to land? And so I really think the practice as a whole, when you talk to people who are trying to, hold themselves to best practice standards, they're really trying to narrow that gap between how the deal needs to get done, how the integration needs to occur. And I'm talking about just acquisitions right now. How the deal needs to get done, how the acquisition needs to be a natural kind of flow out of that deal, and not having some sort of chasm in between where there's, you're ripe for delays or misinformation or just a lack of knowledge being kind of on that continuum of progressing the work forward. So I think, for me, I actually then pivoted to a couple other roles. I left Cisco, got into consulting. My actual goal was I wanted to be a one-man shop and be able to do both deals and integration. And I applaud anyone who is doing both today. I did it for a while, and I realized how hard it is. Not only are you burning the candle on both ends on the deal, you're also having to partition part of your brain to start thinking about, okay, how's this all going to come together integration-wise and long-term, how the business is going to run. And so, it feels like if you are in that seat, people can reach out to me. I'm happy to commiserate, on LinkedIn and share any insights that I have. But it feels like you've run a marathon just to get the deal done. And oh, by the way, it's a one-way marathon. So you ran 26 miles in one direction. Now you signed the deal. Okay. And the deal's closed. Now you got to run 26 miles back home, which is let's get the integration done. And so it's just a large body of work. And I can, there's different skill sets that thrive in different areas. And I knew that there were blind spots or areas of weakness that I had in being a deal lead, not having, investment banking background. And that's where I leaned more heavily on experts who, had, deeper expertise in certain areas than I did. I enjoyed it, but I also recognized that it probably would have taken some years off my life if I continued to do that. So, I've continued to focus on integration work, and if there's spare time that I can apply my skill set to, I find myself getting pulled into a lot of kind of broad cross, enterprise level kind of transformational programs. So I think there's a lot of transferability of skill set of what we see in integration and some aspects of deal work that can be applied and show up real well when you're looking at big, large programs that require, cross-functional coordination across a lot of different people and organizations, high criticality of like, you got to hit this and here's what we're trying to accomplish. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the career. I love doing it. There's aspects of acquisitions, which are fun. There's aspects of divestitures, which are a completely different beast. Anyone who says that, they're the same as acquisitions, don't believe them. They definitely are harder. You're trying to, extract a business, trying to have it land. If you're landing with a strategic, you've got, certain aspects where there's a landing zone for it to go with, the people, the operations, business process, what have you. If you're landing it with like a financial buyer, then you've got a different set of problems that you got to solve for, which is, standing up certain aspects of how the business is running. And so while sometimes discussed in the vein of, acquisitions or divestiture, they are different. Timelines are different. Some of the headwinds that you hit are going to be different. But in totality, when you step back and you look at kind of what do you get to do when you are doing M&A work, wouldn't change it for the world. Love it.
Today's episode is sponsored by DealRoom, the M&A platform for teams running buyer-led M&A. If you've ever spent a Friday chasing 5 people to complete diligence tasks or watched integration timelines slip while everyone blames someone else, this is for you. DealRoom helps you stop herding cats and start aligning your team. You get project management built into the DealRoom with features like real-time tagging, stakeholder alerts, task dependencies, and custom reporting. That means everyone knows what they're responsible for, when it's due, and what's holding things up. Learn more at dealroom.net or click the link in the description. Now let's get back to the episode. Just on the career, you mentioned going from Cisco consulting, not to just drop some logos and names here, but I know you've had run at Symantec, Marvel, Intel. Am I missing anybody else?
Well, the interesting one was from consulting, I went to a small cybersecurity company that was private equity owned. It was Blue Coat Systems. And what was interesting with Blue Coat was we were acquired by Symantec. And, as a practitioner, when you're doing acquisitions, if you've got that rapport with people you're acquiring, you'll hear the inside baseball of some of the headwinds and the difficulties that they had as they came on board, right? I think it was really informative for me to sit in that seat and myself being acquired. And this was after doing this kind of work for 10 years, I was like, okay, now the tables have been turned. I'm actually going through an experience where I'm being acquired. I did not make the choice of who acquired me. What's this change journey feel like? And it was interesting to almost feel like I had the in-body experience of being present in the moment of how that was happening, and then that kind of out of body of like, oh my dear, like what might have been a misstep or something that bothered me. Oh my, I've done that to people. Okay, I'm learning from that. I think that was really, really important to kind of go through that so I can, with authenticity, be able to talk with people. I remember there was, I joined Marvell, and I think the week I joined, we were actually closing a deal. And I remember we closed the deal, and I was up front of probably 50 engineers. And I said, look, I'm on the same journey as you for a couple of reasons. One, I just joined Marvell. And you just joined Marvell. 2, I've been acquired, and I know what you're going through, and I wanted to get let them know that I had empathy for what was going on, and it was one of those situations where it was kind of like when I said it, you could just kind of see this reaction in the room, kind of like a I get it, like he's been through this too, and I think that was important for that audience to understand that I'd kind of gone through an experience like this before.
This is quite the story. Starting off from Stanford basketball, sociology, going to consulting, ending up in a whole series of IT roles at Oracle.
Well, it wasn't at Oracle. It was doing Oracle work.
Doing Oracle work for
different companies. So I was doing Oracle ERP implementations at Hitachi, when I was in consulting, Hitachi Data Systems. Then when I was full time over at WebEx, then another small startup, and then also doing Oracle work at Cisco. So it was very IT focused the first 10 years.
Bunch of IT roles related to Oracle, and then you start a bug and you ended up at WebEx.
Mm-hmm.
And then from WebEx, you went to Cisco, where you got first exposure to M&A, acquiring
WebEx, yeah.
And then from there, moving into consulting that got you to Blue Coat, another startup, and being on the receiving side, then to Symantec, and then Marvell, and then now Intel.
the one thing that I didn't mention was I had a brief stint at HP as it was going through the split. And I remember coming into the organization, and plans had been announced that they were going to split the company into HP Enterprise and HP Inc. And that was interesting to land into, partly just because of the sheer magnitude of the size of the company and the amount of change it was going to go through and splitting itself apart. And then trying to come in and do integrations and deals, knowing that there was just so much change in the air. And it was unique to see how that played out. I wasn't there to see it get to the finish line, but it was super informative to, I think, give me some points of view that have informed me in how I look at certain aspects of divestitures. Just the amount of change that people in the business go through, and just some aspects of how difficult that can be.
What in your background, even starting from basketball till now, that you really felt has attributed to your success and just the skills that you apply today?
I think it really comes down, like, I'm a big team player, and
basketball.
It can't. Yeah, that really grew out of playing a lot of basketball. But I recall, and as I look back on my career and kind of what I think highly most, it's those teams that I was part of that were like, tackling hard problems, there for each other. Different people showed leadership at different times. You had expertise around the room that each knew how to contribute. So, it was like knowing how to come together as a team. Like, those have really been those instances that I look back, whether it was, something athletically or something, in the business world, that I can go back and I can, recall, certain areas of adversity that we overcame or things that we accomplished that we never thought we could. And, I really like to fall into, creating a safe environment for the teams that I create and the people that I bring into my teams. I remember there was a program that I had that had multiple Big Four consultancies contributing to our end goal. And I pulled in the consultants and I had the partners there, and it was an interesting conversation because, typically you don't have competing Big Four people in the room, working on the same thing. And I was very clear on the vision that I wanted this program to have, the goals. And I looked at each of them and I was like, you are part of my team, and we're going to successfully come together and accomplish a lot. And I need you to leave your allegiances to your own firms outside the room, because when you come in the room, you're my team, and my team needs to work well together. And if I find that there's infighting, there's only one thing we're going to do. You're going to get called into the principal's office, i.e. you're coming in with me. We're going to have this conversation once. And if behaviors don't change, there's consequences. And it was good to kind of set the tone, but I also wanted, these people to know, like, look, there was something that we were trying to go and accomplish together. And our collective success was more important than, one group saying, well, I did this and, well, they didn't do that. It was really like, it's the sum of all the parts.
And if you look now, through your journey, you've worked with folks from all different disciplines, backgrounds, coming from different functions. Do you see any other themes, obviously the teamwork component being collaborative, that make folks successful in M&A?
I think there's a couple interesting components that I think make people successful. I think coming into it without any prior business experience or an area of knowledge can be maybe a little overwhelming or difficult. And I think if we focus specifically on like integration and integration related roles, coming through consulting, you get exposure to a lot of different clients, and there's great frameworks for bringing in younger talent, younger hires, having them learn. And I think that's one avenue. I think another avenue is, joining companies that are actually doing M&A, and you may not be part of the M&A ecosystem, but you're working in an organization in a company that does it. So you're getting exposed to it. And at a certain point, I think it's valuable that if you're interested in it, you can find ways to kind of get closer to the gravitational pull of the work, and you can express interest in I'm curious about doing this. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to get into it. And at that point, you've probably had some experience within your own organization and business and built up hopefully some internal expertise that can contribute to what that deal is looking to accomplish. I just think it's really hard to just show up and knock on someone's door and say, I want to do M&A, and not have some aspect of, well, what do you bring to the table that helps us do this well and build upon it?
I like that point of view on how to break into the industry. Just look for companies that are generally acquisitive, get into the company, and then migrate your way towards where the M&A activity is happening. If you're looking at that profile, kind of going back to like what really makes someone successful. Yeah. Like what, because I feel like I get a bunch of people reaching out. They're trying to break into the industry. Hopefully I can tell them just listen to this podcast from here on out. And one is like, can you qualify yourself? Like what, because I think this is the thing I found really interesting working with corporates is that sheer diversity of backgrounds. Mm-hmm. You meet folks, whether it's corp dev, integration, they come up through any function. Yeah. Like it doesn't really matter. There's no consistent theme versus private equity is nearly everybody's coming through an investment bank. Right. And you get a little bit of that in some of the corp dev roles as well. But I was curious, like, is there a certain profile that you see with somebody like, hey, being really type A makes you really suitable for an integration role? Like, or is it just purely the diversity counts as part of assembling a team together?
Yeah, I think I think there's a couple key components, and I'm looking down at some notes that I've written because there's a lot to it. I think one, it helps just to be naturally inquisitive, because when you're at least coming from the integration side of the house, you have a general baseline of, I know what my company does. How does the target do it? How do they process payroll? How do they work with customers? How do they strategize and think about their business? And so I think it helps to just kind of have an inquisitive nature and just kind of this thirst of wanting to learn. I remember when I was doing some consultant work, I worked with a client, and they, after my period of time with them, we had done, I think, 4 deals in 1 year. And we took some of our lessons from the first 2 deals and said, okay, let's approach deal number 3 a little differently. And what was interesting was we did an offsite with some of their key leadership, some of their operational folks. And I remember pulling aside my client and saying, we're gonna structure this differently. And it was a 2-day event. Instead of us doing all the talking on day 1, we're going to do all the listening. And we're going to have the target tell us how they run their business. And we'll have structure. We'll have an agenda. Like, we'll make it valuable to the people in the room. And we'll give them some guidance there. Day 2, instead of us coming in and us telling them, well, this is how we do it, you're going to listen to what they say on day 1. And you're going to come back and say, here's all the things that we're super similar on, and it makes integration super easy. But here's like the 2 or 3 big rocks that we got to go solve for. And that was really interesting to kind of see that play out when we kind of flipped the script, because you saw some really attentive listening by the acquirer. You actually had the target company taking a lot of initiative and really opening up about what they did, how they did it, the problems they had. They actually were already starting to think about, well, if we've dealt with this problem, but if you guys have solved for it, we're happy to change. We'll do whatever. And so in hearing that openness on that day 1, and then having the acquirer come back and kind of is almost like active listening, like, I heard what you said, and I'm playing back to you what you said, but I'm playing it back now through my filter of additional information that I know and I can apply to the problem at hand. It was pretty cool to see how we were able to accelerate and move things a bit more forward to how they worked. And that actually hits like the second point I made here was kind of some new ways of working and thinking, and that's one reason. Like I think our M&A community, regardless of whether you're upfront sourcing deals, working in diligence, doing integration, you name it. I put a big net around kind of the whole community. I just love learning from other experts, and I thoroughly enjoy going to conferences. I love hearing about M&A that happens in other industries. I think I was fascinated a couple of years ago. Someone from oil and gas was talking about M&A, and they said something that they mentioned something integration related that was like it was going to take years, and I was like, well, that's interesting because in the time it might take for years. Like I didn't know enough to understand the context of why it would take that long. So I was curious to learn more, juxtaposed against maybe some of the speed that you can do a quick little 50-person engineering team tuck in, boom, boom, boom. They're integrated within 4 months. So interesting to just pick up that expertise from other practitioners. It's cliche. Everyone says it. I'll say it. Every deal is different. I think maybe every person who does M&A work should have that like tattooed on their wrist. That and maybe I don't comment on rumor and speculation. Those might be two good tattoos to have. And then I think some other common traits. You've got to be comfortable with ambiguity. Like at your core, you got to be able to walk into a room and leave at the door sometimes your expertise or some sense of I know how this is going to go. You need to be really open, and you also need to know that ambiguity in many people that creates a sense of maybe anxiety or discomfort. But if you can recognize that that's going to be there and be understanding and thoughtful that look, that's just part of it. And how do I deal with it? Do I deal with it through, having the right kind of conversations to flesh out more information and kind of narrow down that ambiguity, or put some frameworks around the way I think about it, or how I need to, kind of put a body of work together to deliver X or Y. You can't be afraid of that. And I put it that way because you'll get people who are very, very maybe oriented to like, my job is I put this, box on this, this shelf, and then I go do this and I do that. Like kind of like they're comfortable with the process. Like I come in, I do my job, and I go home. And I think the back to like every deal is different. You're not going to be the expert on everything. You're going to come into these situations where ambiguity is the biggest, kind of elephant in the room. But you got to be comfortable with working through that. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's as important. It could be just as basic as saying, look, here's our guiding principles for what we're trying to accomplish. Let's anchor back to those and not get overwhelmed by fraught and anxiousness. And I also think the ability to lead is really important. And I think I like to see leadership across every level of the deal and the integration. And I think leading shows up many different ways. It doesn't mean you're the person at the top of the governance chart, leading the deal and accountable for it. It spans the whole the breadth of, you may be organized around functions, and that's how you integrate. Well, you're showing leadership within your function, or you may be a subject matter expertise deep in the organization, but your knowledge shows up as leadership when you're able to step into a room and really convey, some aspects of how the business needs to run or operate or get integrated. So I don't think leadership is just something that people at certain levels in the organization need to show. I think it needs to show up everywhere. And I think one of the hard dynamics, and this actually goes back to something I learned back in my sociology days, was the difference between formal and informal authority. So, formal authority. I'm your manager. I'm your boss. I'm whatever. Well, okay, formal org chart kind of stuff versus the informal of I'm the expert in the room, but I have no association with you. And how do I somehow show up and lead or attempt to lead based on my ability to contribute to the problem at hand and helping to develop a solution and get us where we need to go. So I think that's why I really think like leadership shows up a lot of different ways. And that's always something that with younger people who I either talk with or mentor or have been part of my teams, it's something that I try to instill and really say, look, you're always going to learn to be better leaders. I'm always on a journey to be a better leader. But it's something that you shouldn't shy away from. And in fact, it's something that in many cases, people are going to be like, hey, thank you for stepping up, or thank you for saying that, or thank you for leading. Sometimes it's just the little things. I remember telling a junior person a long time ago, I was like, look, if you just raise your hand and say, hey, I've got that action item, I'll take that. That's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can build upon that. I think you have to be a strong communicator. Communications and communications also, when I say communications, it highly leveraged on listening. I like to joke that we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and let's use them in that proportion. So I think, there's a lot of power in being able to listen, to understand, and kind of think through what are the difficulties of deal work and integration work, and then, playing that back and being able to kind of synthesize what you heard versus what you know, and how does that come together. And some of those interpersonal skills that come along with that. I learned a lot about myself over the years taking, like Myers-Briggs tests at different companies. And it's been an interesting journey because at one point I actually tested out as a pretty strong introvert. And now if I test out, I wouldn't say a full extrovert, but I've crossed the line. And it was interesting because I remember, it was probably about 15 years ago, I remember feeling like, okay, that pendulum's switching a little bit from being an introvert to kind of getting extrovert. And it was interesting because I read some materials. There was a book that Susan Cain wrote. I think it was something, it might have been like The Power of Quiet. And she was an introvert, and I remember watching a TED Talk, and she starts her TED Talk off articulating that as a youth, her family would go on vacation, and they'd all get to their location, bust out a book, and that's what they did. They just went full introvert reading, and they all enjoyed that. And her research and writings actually were very interesting to me because it highlighted some dynamics of how do you take strengths of being an introvert and turn what is perceived as maybe weaknesses of an introvert, but really are strengths, and how you flip that on its head and kind of benefit from that. So that was really interesting for me, in understanding a little bit of the introvert side of me. And then more lately it's been, okay, how does the extrovert side of me kind of, grow and continue on that journey? So I like to think like I can take an introvert and make them feel comfortable, pull them aside, have a one-on-one conversation, because introverts are really good at making personal connections and diving deep in the topics versus, the extrovert who wants to be in the room full of energy and is just, soaking all that up. And so I think some of those interpersonal skills and dynamics are really important because you're going to come across people doing deal work that are across the whole gamut. And I think that's helpful. And then I think especially coming into this work, you have to understand that there is an intersection of strategic and tactical views that come together at different points in time over different aspects of where the deal is. And being able to think about strategy and how does that dissect into, okay, how does that maybe play out 3 or 4 steps down the line that might land in integration? Or is there something in integration that you know of that is going to kind of go upstream and impact the strategy? And so being aware that you can't just come into this kind of work and be like, well, it's highly strategic and it's this and it's this. Well, there's a bit of rolling your sleeves up and you've got to really understand how the business works. And if you don't have that appreciation, I think for both different lenses that get applied, you'll find yourself, tripping up on things that in hindsight, you're like, we should, we see that, we should have done that, or, didn't see that. So I think I sometimes use the analogy of you got to be a helicopter pilot. You got to be able to, fly up to I don't know if a helicopter can get up to 10,000 feet. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's got to be able to get, high.
Right, right.
But then you got to hey, I'm going to go be a crop duster. I'm getting in the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zoom in, zoom out.
Yeah.
And so we got being inquisitive. Big part of that is listening. Highly agree with. And then identifying new ways to do things. Being comfortable with ambiguity.
Let me poke on something, new ways to do things. And the reason I poke on this is you will commonly, I routinely see new people coming into this and ask, and almost coming in, it was so fresh of an eye, which I don't mind, but saying, well, what's the new metric, or what's the new this and what's the new that? And maybe Jim Buckley and I had a deep conversation on this once or twice, but it's kind of like, look, like there's some basic metrics like that aren't that are just routine to running a business. Like there's like no new analytic. Like I'm thinking about, like, I don't know baseball real well, and I don't know like maybe you're a bigger baseball fan than me.
No.
But like there's like there's some acronym, maybe it's WAR or OPS. I know there's something out there that is synonymous with success, and it's it might be like a combination of like how many times did you strike versus hit the ball versus take a walk. Like more or less an algorithm to give you a metric.
Okay, batting average.
Even more complex than that.
Oh, okay.
Batting average on steroids. And it's kind of like, well, batting average is good enough. You don't need to go, we don't need to go boil the ocean on something else.
Yeah.
So I think one thing is, but I do pay attention to like, okay, but is there someone else who's maybe looking at it a little differently? And usually when they're looking at it a little differently, it's maybe something specific to their industry, something specific to their peers, but nothing that I walk away going like, oh my dear, like I have to write an Excel macro or do some database scripting to actually gain insights. It's pretty basic business fundamentals.
I agree. That's like a good way to look at it. Caveat that just don't just throw new ways on everything.
The wheel is a wheel for a good reason. It's round and it works.
We talked about leadership. We talked about having good communication skills, which I think is a big part of leadership. And then I liked how you mentioned essentially taking like strategy through execution, sort of that gap in between, being able to zoom in, zoom out, and really,
and there's no wrong way in approaching it. And I say that because I think if one has this thirst for learning and really loving getting into the weeds of M&A, they're going to come at it probably with some sort of disposition that either puts them more so on the side of strategy and strategic, kind of on-ramps into the work, or they're going to come up kind of, very tactical. I came through a very tactical, mechanism of business applications and understanding, data and how it all came together. And so my area of growth was more, pointed towards, I need to understand more aspects of, go to market, product strategy, product, customer fit, things like that. So it was fun to go explore those. It wasn't fun when maybe I thought I knew too much and I, espoused to be an expert in something and quickly got my hand slapped and realized, okay, there's still more learning you need to go do. But I think there's a good mix to have, being able to kind of look at the body of work through multiple lenses.
We talked about breaking into the industry. You mentioned just start off by getting into organizations that are generally acquisitive, and then make your way into where the M&A happens. Or anything else around breaking into the industry? Because this one comes up a lot from folks, especially if you're not coming up through investment banking.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there was a point where I remember I might have been like a sophomore or junior in college, and I thought I wanted to be an investment banker. And I did a summer internship with Smith Barney, and it was the farthest thing from investment banking. They actually threw me the white pages and said, start cold calling because you're selling PG&E preferred bonds. I wasn't even, I wasn't even registered to go sell. I was just like finding warm leads. So, I know that's not investment banking, and investment banking has a lot of great skill sets that come to bear. But I think what's interesting about getting into this body of work is from the outside, it looks interesting. It's, dynamic. It's everything. It's different. There's a bit of sexiness to it. There's a bit of, intrigue. I can't tell you what I'm working on, but I'm working on something big, that kind of mystique. Right. And then, I think, people break in and they're going to know within like one or two deals, whether it's for them or not.
I agree.
Like, hey, you're going to be pulling, 80-hour work weeks on the work days. And oh, by the way, you're going to be doing another 20 hours on the weekend. You want to sign up for that? Some of us, know that there's the peaks and valleys. And I had my first manager doing IT integration work said, look, Todd, there's peaks and valleys. When we're climbing the mountain, going to the peak, like you got to be all in. But when we're coming down into the valley, I know you need to recharge your batteries. I might not want to see you in the office for a week. You gotta do that. He was also the same person who said, rip the Band-Aid off, let the healing begin. So he had a few sayings that stuck with me. But I think, sometimes the hardest thing is just getting your foot in the door. And I think there's a lot of competition to doing that. That's why, like, I think getting exposure, like, consulting is a great way to kind of, check it out. If you can get into a consulting firm that has a practice that you can learn, because a lot of firms have done a lot of different work. You get a lot of corporations that maybe don't want to make the investment in having a full-time corp dev organization. And so, they're looking to consultancies to kind of come in and help, when a deal needs to be done, we'll bring them in. Okay, thank you for your service. Deal's done. Let's move on. But there's other companies who've made the investment into having, full-time corporate development teams. And I'd say interestingly enough, you'll see a couple different structures in how those teams are set up. So some will have a dedicated corp dev organization and then have dedicated corp dev and M&A integration folks in functions around the table. And that's pretty formal. You'll have other organizations that are a bit more dynamic who might just say, hey, look, we're going to do the National Guard model. And, when a deal's about to happen, we're going to blow the horn and pull everyone together. Because you're kind of informally part of the deal team. So, those are some dynamics to think about as you're looking at what kind of organization might give you the best entry point into being affiliated or adjacent to kind of the work that's being done. I would say in larger organizations where perhaps there's more formal alignment of, like a finance team, and within finance, they've got their M&A integration team, 2 or 3 people, what have you, you can, flex up or down with the numbers, but they've got some sort of formality, right? In those larger organizations, if you're interested in M&A, and if you're coming at it, let's say from the integration side, and you've got some sort of expertise in some part of the business, you could probably within a couple phone calls or connections within your own network of your company, could probably identify, hey, who does that? Now, it may not be always obvious because there may not be a deal in flight. Maybe the company hasn't done a deal in a year. But when the call is made, someone's probably going to be there. So it's just a little bit of hunting and pecking and going and have coffee, getting to know people, asking around, and you'll find that. And then I think displaying a desire to get into it is always helpful. I mean, there's obvious external signs where it's like, I'm applying to this job and it's M&A related, right? But if, let's say you're on that journey to kind of, you're in a large organization, you don't know if that capability is there or not, but just exploring it and having those conversations, that's going to, someone's going to be like, wow, you know what? We actually have someone who is showing some interest in this, and, they might be the right person that we pull in the next time we do a deal. I would rather have someone who is excited and passionate and wants to learn and do this kind of stuff versus someone who's just like, got another deal. So yeah, there's a bit of mindset around that I think is also super helpful.
Let's rip apart networking, because I feel like it is such an important thing. We talked about it before. I mean, this has been pretty instrumental to your success. And I time after time just see kids coming out of undergrad, even grad programs that just lack this skill. Mm-hmm. And for me, can credit a lot of my success from it. So I got to know you.
We networked.
And exactly. And I feel like let's talk through maybe a playbook for those that maybe aren't strong in this area. Because I think first and foremost, you got to get good at this, especially like getting into M&A. I always joke around, and it's probably not that much of a joke, but like in the Bay Area, it's none of the jobs get posted in M&A. It's all who you know. I mean, that's how it is. I mean, I get texts from people I know, and it's just, hey, I got this role open. Do you know anybody? And it's like, well,
it is an interesting. I would say the M&A community is pretty tight in that regard. It once you start networking, you realize you're like, I've networked with some people. I've got a bit of of a peer group, and then you realize there's like even more out there. I was at an event earlier this week where I recognized some names of folks at companies where I was like, wait, I thought I had known people who'd been there before, but there was turnover and such, and I was like, oh, there's a new name I've not met, and so I made the effort to go introduce myself, and we were there for a common topic about some AI tools, and so it just led to some natural conversations, and I'm going to go have coffee with these people and kind of learn a little bit more about what they do. But I think networking in and of itself needs to be bi-directional. Like, it can't be, hey, Kisan, I'm going to network with you because I want something from you.
Okay, this is good. How not to network.
This is kind of how not to network.
Imagine the person that in a conference, you always see at least one person that will go around, give you an elevator pitch, hand you a business card, and go to the next person, and they're literally just trying to work the whole room.
Oh, my dear. I remember seeing those people, and you could see them coming from a mile away.
Oh, yeah.
And you're just like, oh, my dear, here they come. And then you just you're like, let's watch this train wreck. And you just see how they kind of elbow into a conversation where, like, where'd you come from? And then they're doing their pitch, leaving their business card, and then just, hightailing it to the next person. And you can see it because they walk into a conversation like this. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to read your name, and in smaller letters, they're trying to read the name of your company.
Or qualifying you.
They're just doing that. Which is funny because sometimes, like, I'll go to an event and they'll give you like a name card, with a little magnet and such. I'll just slip it in my pocket and just try to be as inconspicuous as I can.
Best. So that's how not to network.
That's how not to network. I think, good networking. I think you need to know a little bit about who you want to network and why you want to network with them. You don't want to come across as being too salesy and not genuine. I think a lot of one's own success can be attributed to how genuine are they to who they are. Like, there's of people who you're just like, they're one version of themselves in one setting and a different version in a different setting. And I've always tried to live by, like, look, I just want to be as genuine to who I am. And that gives me peace. It removes anxiety from my life. It feels authentic. And sure, maybe it doesn't click with certain people, and that's okay. But it allows me to, network and talk with different people and feel good about what I'm saying and how I'm talking and how I'm representing things, my interest in these people. I think you can't show up and network and think like, okay, I need to memorize where they went to school, what they did, the deals they did, all these things. Like, ask some good inquisitive questions and do a lot of listening. I always enjoy asking questions where I barely have to say anything, and I just learn a lot about people and just listen. And you do a good job of this in your interviews. You're writing down notes. I'm saying things, and you're like, "Yeah, you mentioned this. Let's come back to that." The ratio of me talking versus you is about 98% me, 2% you. But the 2% that you're contributing is really diving into hearing more about my background and experiences. So I'm going to start asking you more questions.
I think that's the thing, is like coming with that intention of just really listening and learning.
Yeah.
And being inquisitive.
Yeah. And I think is, sometimes when maybe you put it in the frame of mentoring, sometimes mentoring gets a bad knack because people think of it as like just a one-way exchange. And I think, the two-way exchange of understanding, how you can network is really valuable. I have a large network on LinkedIn, and I like staying in touch with people who are out there. I like seeing their successes. I like, helping them if they're, putting their hand out and I need some help on, with this or that. But what I don't appreciate is just those blind requests that show up in your inbox, and you're like, who is this person and why are they reaching out to me? So I will typically, I have a couple sentences that I've saved on my phone, and I just cut and paste it into some of these because there's some outreaches that like make sense. You're like, oh, I can see a fit. They might know 10 other people that I know. Okay, there might be some sort of fit there. And usually in those cases, I'll say, hey, thanks for the outreach. Good to see. Good to get introduced to you. It looks like we might have some common people that we know. Love to learn a little bit more about how we could, learn a bit more about each other and see if it's worth connecting. So I've fallen into wanting to have a conversation with somebody before blindly accepting an invite. Sometimes I send those emails out and I'll get a response and someone will say, oh, sorry, didn't mean to send it to you. Or, maybe I accidentally clicked on your name and sent an invite. Sometimes those actually do churn out to be, very interesting. But yeah, more often than not, it's, it's interesting to just see the human nature reaction to some of these, invite requests that come over from time to time.
Yeah, that's so true. But the best practices, I think we got a good point about like just being genuine about connecting with people, learning from them. I think that's always a good point of view. Just, hey, I'm interested in your background.
Yeah.
I want to learn from your experience.
Yeah.
I actually have a funny story. I'll hijack it for the
Hijack it. Go for it. And I'll start asking the questions. Tables are turned.
I had this intern.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, I didn't plan to have the intern. It was reporting up to another leader in the organization, but they were like, hey, this person's just super excited. And, I thought it'd be good just for him to work with you a little bit or just for you to spend some time with them. And I'm like, sure. I didn't have a plan in place. It wasn't, at a time when I'm working on something and I have an intern for specific reasons. So I wasn't really sure what to do with them. But I said, hey, super green, super motivated. I said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go on LinkedIn and I want you to have 5 conversations with people in our space. Mm-hmm. Just go network. And I gave him the playbook. I said, go connect with people, tell them how you're interested in whatever career path they are. And because he was interested in finance. So think about where you want to be 5-10 years out. Find people in that career.
Not like the old E-Trade ad where I want to be in middle management.
Maybe. Well, and then find those people, reach out, connect with them, say, hey, I'm really interested in getting a career path that you're in. Thought it'd be great to learn from your experience. And then I told him, you'd be surprised, like a third of the people will connect with you and say nothing. And that's when you follow up and for something tailored that, thanks for connecting. Thought it'd be great to grab an intro call and learn from your experience. Open a 15 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised. Then you get a really high response rate because they already connected with you and then you're following up and you're just generally trying to learn. And it was so interesting. He came back to me the next week. He's like, I had those 5 conversations. He's so excited. He was like, oh my God, I talked to this person. This person told me to stay in touch. He'll give me a job when I graduate. And he's just like had all these great insights. And it was just so much of an eye opener for him. I'm like, that's the one thing I want you to learn that I don't think your school is teaching you. And it's just, that was it. I was like done. I felt like accomplished. I served the value for the internship here.
It was interesting. It's interesting you mentioned how perhaps that wasn't being taught in school. I taught a course at Santa Clara University for a long number of years, and it was interesting because it was a leadership curriculum that gave you like a little asterisk on your degree, when you graduated. But it was noted there. But the curriculum was interesting because I think the first class or the first 2 classes were deep into some leadership practices. And at that point, Barry Posner was the dean. He had written the book with his research partner. I think it was The Leadership Practice. Things like, inspire a shared vision, model the way, challenge the process, those kind of things. And so the students, had a little bit of a framework around leadership. And then as I came in, some of what I taught were more of like, how do you actually take some of those principles, put them into practice? And we talked about things like networking, how to work in teams, how to, have difficult conversations and such. And so, yeah, I think, there's aspects of, how do you take some of these nuggets that, excite, kids and interns and younger people in the workplace. And, if they're still on their, their undergraduate journey, how do you plug that in and kind of highlight that, this is really important to you. And, you can learn from it. And it sounds like, the story you just said, this guy was just, completely jazzed up, excited about, every conversation he had and just, where things went.
That's where we'll pause the conversation for now. We covered a lot of ground. And the next episode, we'll pick it up right where we left off and keep digging in. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in part 2.